They said no maid ever survived in that house. It was a mansion built for power, but ruled by fear. 9 had come. 9 had run. But then one day, a woman arrived, with nothing but a nylon bag, and the fire of a mother's love. Her name was Grace. And what she did inside those walls would not only heal a home, it would awaken a woman who had forgotten how to feel. They called it the house that broke women, a mansion so beautiful it could have been a presidential palace, tucked deep into the heart of Bishop's Court, Cape Town, surrounded by jacaranda trees and high stone walls. Behind its tall black gates, elegance whispered from every tile, but so did fear. No maid had lasted more than 2 weeks in that house. Some left weeping, others ran. A few never even returned after their first day. But Grace Thompson wasn't like the others. She didn't come with dreams of luxury or hopes for promotion. She came with a purpose that burned hotter than fear, a daughter named Lily, lying in a hospital bed back in Durban, her small chest rising and falling, with the quiet rhythm of a heart fighting to survive. Grace stepped through the gate wearing a plain dress and old sneakers. She held a single nylon bag and her daughter's medical report tucked between clothes. Her dark skin glowed with sweat under the morning sun, and her eyes carried a stillness no one could easily read. The house loomed before her. Towering glass windows, spotless white pillars, cars so polished they mirrored the sky. But Grace saw none of it. Her mind was on the hospital bills, the oxygen tank Lily needed, and the list of medications the nurse had whispered to her the day before. A short, stout woman with graying cornrows, Mama Boosie, the head cook, met her at the back door. "You're the new one?" she asked, her tone flat. Grace nodded. "Yes, Ma. Grace Thompson." Mama Boosie muttered, leading her in. "Don't unpack too much. We had 9 of you in 6 months." No one welcomed her. No one asked her name again. They were tired of learning names that disappeared. A younger steward pointed her to a mop and said only, "Start with the marble floors. Madam is coming downstairs." Grace didn't argue. She tied her scarf, gripped the mop, and got to work. Her hands moved steadily, even as her mind whispered, 3 months, Grace. Just survive 3 months. For Lily. Then she heard it. Click, clack, click, clack. Heels on marble. A scent of expensive perfume filled the air, followed by silence that could slice through steel. She looked up and saw her for the first time. Mrs. Victoria Sinclair. She was tall, light-skinned, with cheekbones like stone and eyes that never blinked too long. Dressed in a crimson silk robe, she held a teacup like it was a crown. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She looked Grace over, then looked at the mop and water bucket. Then, with chilling calm, she tipped the entire bucket over with her foot. Water spilled across the spotless tiles. Grace stepped back, her heart stammering. "This is the 3rd time this week someone blocks my walkway," Victoria said, her voice sharp but soft. "Clean it. Now." Grace didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She bent down, soaked feet and all, and began wiping. From the corner, another maid whispered to Mama Boosie, "She won't last. She looks too gentle." But they were wrong. Grace wasn't weak. She was a mother on a mission. She had begged strangers in hospital corridors, slept in clinic waiting rooms, sold every item she owned. Pride had died a long time ago. What remained was quiet fire. By 5 a.m. the next morning, Grace was sweeping the front porch. By 6 a.m., she was in the kitchen washing dishes beside Mama Boosie. "You wake early," the cook said, watching her. Grace offered a tired smile. "I just want to do my work well." Mama Boosie said again, less harsh this time. "This house, it's not about how early you wake up. It's about how long you can survive Madam's mouth." As if summoned, Victoria walked in, tied silk robe clinging to her perfect waist. She didn't greet. She didn't glance at anyone. Her voice sliced through the kitchen. "Where is my lemon water?" Mama Busi fumbled. "I was just about to—" "I wasn't asking you," Victoria said coldly, her eyes landing on Grace. Grace wiped her hands and bowed slightly. "I'll get it, Ma." "Room temperature," Victoria barked. "Not cold, not warm. If I sip it and feel like I swallowed lava or ice, you'll regret it." Grace nodded. "Yes, Ma." She moved carefully, her hands steady. She sliced 2 perfect lemon rounds, dropped them into a clear glass of lukewarm water, and walked up the marble staircase to Victoria's room. She knocked once. "Ma, your water." "Come in." The room was golden. Expensive perfume bottles lined the dresser. A small white dog blinked at her from the bed. Grace placed the glass on a tray by the bedside. Victoria sipped once, paused, and smirked. "You're lucky. You got it right." Grace turned to leave. "Wait," Victoria said suddenly. "There's a stain on my bathroom sink. I hate stains." "I'll clean it now, Ma." As Grace entered the bathroom, she saw it. A faint rust line. She reached for the spray bottle and scrubbed gently. Her elbow nudged something. A perfume bottle wobbled. She caught it just in time. But when she turned, Victoria was at the door, arms folded. Without a word, she slapped her hard across the face. "You're clumsy," she said coldly. "I don't like clumsy people." Grace's cheek burned, but she didn't cry. She bowed her head and whispered, "I'm sorry, Ma." Then she placed the perfume bottle back exactly where it was. Outside the room, Mr. Richard Sinclair, graying and regal in his crisp agbada, had heard everything. Their eyes met. He didn't speak, but in his eyes a flicker of pity. Grace didn't need pity. She needed her salary for Lily, and she would not leave. Not yet. Not until her daughter could live. The slap still echoed in Grace's mind long after it had landed, but her face remained unreadable. She had long learned that tears don't heal children and that silence sometimes was the strongest scream. The next morning, Grace was up before the first bird call. She swept the garden paths under the shadow of Table Mountain and washed the estate's towering windows until the sun danced off the glass. Inside the kitchen, Mama Busi observed her in silence. There was no bitterness in Grace's movements, only discipline and endurance. She didn't gossip, didn't complain, didn't flinch when the others whispered, "She won't last." But Mrs. Victoria Sinclair noticed too, and she didn't like what she saw. There was something defiant about Grace's calm. Most maids flinched, begged, or snapped. Grace simply endured, and that unnerved her. So Victoria turned up the temperature. That afternoon, Grace returned to her small, shared quarters to find her uniform missing. In its place, a ridiculous see-through nightgown had been hung like a warning. The other maids looked away nervously. Grace didn't react. She changed into her faded Durban wrapper and t-shirt, tied her scarf neatly, and reported for duty. When she walked into the living room with her mop, Victoria froze, took one look, and smiled. "Did you sleep in the gutter?" she said loudly. "Or are you just dressing to match the mop?" Some of the junior staff snickered nervously. Grace bowed and began cleaning without a word. But the quieter Grace became, the more Victoria's attacks intensified. It was like trying to bruise water. It kept moving, absorbing, never cracking. One morning, Victoria intentionally spilled red wine on the white rug, then stood back and said, "Oops, you should probably clean that before it sets, though I doubt someone with your village hands knows how." Grace knelt without comment and cleaned it until not a single stain remained. Another time, Victoria dropped a crystal bowl, then blamed Grace. You broke it, didn't you?" "I'll clean it up, Ma," Grace replied softly, sweeping the shards into a tray. That evening, while Victoria sipped rooibos tea on the upstairs balcony, Mr. Richard Sinclair sat in the garden with his newspaper. The sound of sweeping caught his ear. He turned. There was Grace, in the fading light, gently brushing dust from the marble flower path. Her wrapper was fraying at the edges. Her sandals had holes. Her shoulders sagged, but her posture did not. "Grace, right?" he asked, lowering the paper. "Yes, sir," she replied, straightening. He looked at her thoughtfully. "Are they treating you well here?" Grace paused, then smiled softly. "They're treating me how life treats many people, sir. But I'll be okay." Richard nodded slowly. That night over dinner, he asked his wife, "Why is that girl still here? Most would have left after the first week." Victoria raised a brow and said, "Because she's useful, quiet, doesn't talk back." But the truth sat deeper. Victoria wasn't just intrigued, she was threatened. She could break a person with a stare, but Grace refused to shatter. And that quiet, unwavering presence, it unsettled her more than any rebellion ever could. Days turned into weeks. The mansion's rhythms remained the same, but the air had shifted. The gardener started humming old Zulu hymns while pruning the hedges. The cleaner laughed once during breakfast cleanup. Even Mandla, the gatekeeper, began asking after Grace's daughter in passing. "You a peek in? She day okay?" he would say with his signature grin. Grace always smiled. "Still breathing. God is good." But inside the mansion, a storm brewed. And it wasn't Grace who was breaking. It was Victoria. She just didn't know it yet. It was a gray Saturday morning, the kind where clouds huddled low over Cape Town's mountains, and the air smelt like something waiting to break. Rain tapped gently against the mansion windows, too soft to be a storm, too steady to be ignored. Inside the house, a strange silence blanketed the halls. No shouting, no clicking heels, no orders barked from the staircase. Grace had just finished sweeping the east wing when something in the hallway mirror caught her eye, a reflection that froze her mid-step. Mrs. Victoria Sinclair, seated on the floor at the end of the hallway. Not on her velvet chaise lounge, not at her marble vanity. On the floor, barefoot. Her once flawless silk scarf hung loosely from her head, her robe wrinkled. Mascara streaked across her cheeks like she'd wiped away tears too quickly. Her wine glass from the night before sat untouched beside her. Her phone was locked and forgotten. One heel was tossed across the floor, the other still on her foot. Grace stood still, broom in hand. She had never seen Victoria look human. The woman who once slapped her for brushing a perfume bottle was now staring into a mirror like she didn't recognize herself. Grace wanted to walk away. This wasn't her business. But something deeper than duty, something almost maternal, held her feet in place. She stepped forward slowly. "Ma," she said, voice soft as mist. Victoria turned sharply. Her face, usually ironclad, was vulnerable and shaken. "What do you want?" she snapped, wiping her face hastily. Grace bowed her head, not in fear, but in respect. She reached into her apron and unfolded a small, clean towel. Quietly, she placed it beside Victoria on the floor. Then, without waiting for thanks, she turned to leave. "Wait." Victoria's voice cracked. Not like glass, but like a soul trying to find breath. Grace stopped. Victoria's eyes shimmered, not with anger, but something far more dangerous. Honesty. "Why do you stay?" she asked. Grace turned back. Her voice was steady. "Because I need to. For my daughter. You could find another job." Grace smiled faintly. Maybe, but not one that pays as well. And Lily's hospital doesn't accept excuses. Victoria blinked, lips parted. You're not scared of me? Grace paused. Then she said what no one had ever dared say in that house. I used to be scared of life. But when you're holding your child's hand in an emergency room at 2 a.m., listening to a machine keep her alive, what else is left to fear? Victoria looked away, a sharp breath escaping her lips. Silence returned. But it wasn't hostile. It was thick with something new, understanding. Then in a whisper, Victoria confessed something Grace never expected. They said I wasn't good enough. Grace's brow creased gently. Who, Ma? My husband's family, his friends, even people at church. They called me a pretty face, said I was too young, too vain, that I'd never measure up to his first wife. Her voice dropped. I thought if I could control everything, if the house was spotless, if the staff feared me, if I never let anyone too close, maybe I'd be enough for him, or for myself. Grace didn't speak. She didn't pity her. She just sat down beside her, not too close, not too far, not to console, not to correct, just to be present. For the first time, Victoria didn't tell someone to leave. She didn't scold. She just stared at her own reflection and let herself breathe. The next morning, the mansion exhaled with her. There were no slammed doors, no broken dishes, no shouting about lemon water or misplaced towels. Instead, Grace swept the front porch, humming softly, an old church chorus her mother once sang while cooking on Sunday afternoons. She didn't even notice Victoria watching her from the corridor, silent. Is that a gospel song? Victoria asked. Grace looked up, surprised. Yes, Ma. My mom used to sing it when times were hard. Victoria nodded once and walked away. But she didn't shout. She didn't insult. Just walked. In the kitchen, Mama Boozy raised an eyebrow and whispered to the steward. Did she just pass me without yelling about the pepper? He nodded slowly. She even said good morning. The day after the mirror incident, the mansion on Bishop Langley Drive felt lighter. No one said it aloud, but everyone moved differently. The housekeeper hummed quietly. Mandla opened the gate with less grumble in his bones. Even the shadows in the hallway seemed to shift just slightly to the left. But Grace didn't take it for granted. She swept, she mopped. She folded sheets with the same precision as before. She wasn't here for comfort. She was here for Lily. Then, unexpectedly, that Sunday morning, as the first light crept over Table Mountain, Mrs. Victoria Sinclair called out from the top of the stairs. Grace. It was the first time she'd used her name. Grace turned. Yes, Ma? Victoria didn't bark orders this time. Her voice was lower, thoughtful. Get dressed after breakfast. You'll take the day off. Grace blinked. Ma? Go see your daughter. You've earned it. Grace's heart skipped. She hadn't seen Lily in over 3 weeks. She hadn't dared ask for a break. Not with the hospital bills piling, not with Victoria's moods, and now, just like that, she was being given time. Yes, Ma, she whispered, her voice shaking. Victoria added almost awkwardly, There's an envelope for you on your breakfast tray. Grace found it wrapped in tissue. Inside, neatly folded, RS5 000, and a handwritten note. For transport, and whatever she might need. V. Grace's hands trembled. It wasn't the money, it was the softness. A gesture wrapped not just in generosity, but in trust. She took a minibus taxi from Cape Town City Center, then a bus from Belleville Station all the way to Durban. The road was long and hot, but her spirit raced faster than the wheels. At the Durban Heart Children's Clinic, Grace entered the pediatric ward with small steps and a big heart. Lily was there, slim, fragile. But when she saw her mother, her eyes lit up like Christmas. "Mommy!" Grace dropped to her knees beside the bed, tears spilling from a well of gratitude. She held her daughter close, her heartbeat syncing with the tiny, uneven rhythm of Lily's chest. They talked, laughed, shared a bowl of pap. Grace brushed her daughter's hair and tied it with a small, colorful ribbon she had bought for Rs-20 on the road. "Mommy," Lily asked softly, "you said we'll go home when you get money. Is it soon?" Grace smiled, though her eyes betrayed the ache. "Very soon, my love. God is helping us. Just hold on." Back in Cape Town, Victoria sat at her vanity, brushing her long hair. Her hand paused at the silver-frame photograph she never dared touch, Richard and his late first wife, smiling in their wedding attire. The perfect woman. The one everyone adored. The one whose ghost still sat at the dinner table in the eyes of society. Victoria stared at the frame for a long time. Then, for the first time in years, a tear escaped. Just one. Soft. Silent. But real. She didn't wipe it away. When Grace returned that Monday morning, she found Mandla waiting at the gate. "Auntie Grace," he beamed. "Welcome back. We missed your face-o." She smiled and bowed slightly. Inside, the house was bright. Even the air felt washed clean. As she entered the kitchen, Mama Busi dropped her spoon mid-stir. "You actually came back?" "I said I would." Mama Busi nodded. "Strong blood runs in you." Then, unexpectedly, from upstairs came Victoria's voice. "Grace, come, please." Everyone froze. Grace climbed the stairs slowly. Victoria stood in her dressing gown, holding a white envelope. "This is for Lily's medication." "Ma!" "Don't argue. Just take it." She handed her Rs-10,000 in cash. Grace stood speechless. Victoria looked away, then said, "That thing you said, about how life breaks you until nothing scares you anymore. I think I understand now." Grace looked into her eyes, not as a maid to a madam, but as one woman to another. "Pain makes us do things, Ma. But it doesn't have to make us cruel." The sentence hung between them like incense, soft, lingering, sacred. Downstairs, Mandla turned up the radio. A gospel song floated into the house. The mansion on Bishop Langley Drive breathed again. The following week, the Sinclair mansion thrived in an unfamiliar rhythm. Not loud, not dramatic, but peaceful. The staff noticed it first. Mama Busi's stew was spicier, richer, seasoned not just with ingredients, but joy. The housekeeper, usually stern, now shared jokes at the breakfast table. Even Mandla, the gateman, started whistling praise songs as he polished the front gate. And at the center of it all was Grace Thompson, still a maid, still dressed in modest wrappers, but now treated with a quiet respect. No one said it aloud, but they all felt it. Then one Thursday afternoon, as Grace was placing folded towels on the guest bed, a knock came on the doorframe. Mrs. Victoria Sinclair stood there, not commanding, not cold, just present. "Grace," she said, her voice gentle, "I'd like you to accompany me somewhere tomorrow." Grace blinked. "Yes, Ma. Where to?" "To a women's luncheon. At the Vineyard Hotel in Stellenbosch." Grace's eyebrows lifted. "Ma, I don't think—" "You don't have to say anything," Victoria interrupted softly. "Just be there. I want you to meet some people." Grace hesitated. "But I don't have the kind of clothes for—" "I already took care of it," Victoria said, turning. "There's something on your bed." When Grace returned to her quarters, she found it. A peach-colored gown, soft and flowing, folded neatly beside a matching scarf, and simple pearl earrings. It wasn't flashy, it was elegant, dignified. Grace touched it gently, then sat on the edge of her bed and wept, not out of pain, but from being seen. The next morning, the Sinclair driver opened the SUV door for her like she was royalty. She sat beside Victoria, who wore a navy blue midi dress and no perfume. Just a calm energy she hadn't worn before. The journey to Stellenbosch was quiet, but not tense. Comfortable. At the Vineyard Hotel, women in flowing gowns and polished heels mingled in the garden terrace. Champagne glasses clinked. Laughter floated between canapes. Victoria walked in, Grace beside her. Heads turned. Not in scorn, but curiosity. "This is Grace Thompson," Victoria said to the first circle of women. "She's stronger than most people I know. And she has a daughter who's a fighter." One woman leaned forward with a warm smile. "I'm Dr. Adesuwa Malan. I run the Children's Cardiac Foundation of South Africa. Maybe we can help." Grace's heart skipped. Victoria placed a hand on her back. "I've already sent them Lily's details." Grace blinked. "Thank you," she whispered. Dr. Adesuwa smiled. "Let's talk Monday." Back at the mansion, that night, Grace returned to her usual chores, untied her scarf, removed her gown, swept the hall. But something inside her had shifted. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming. 3 days later, while peeling yam in the kitchen, her small cell phone rang. The number was unknown. "Hello," Grace answered, wiping her hands. "Good morning. Is this Miss Grace Thompson, mother of Lily Thompson?" Yes, this is she." "This is Dr. Adesuwa from the Children's Cardiac Foundation. We've reviewed Lily's case, her test results, and her scans. We'd like to fully sponsor her heart surgery." Silence. Grace gripped the counter. "I'm sorry, Ma. What did you say?" "We'll cover everything. Transport, medication, post-op care. We're assigning a pediatric nurse. You don't need to worry." Grace dropped to her knees. Tears streamed down her face. "Thank you, Jesus," she cried. Mama Busi rushed in, alarmed. "What happened?" Grace looked up, beaming through tears. "They're paying for the surgery. Everything. Lily's going to live." The kitchen erupted. Even Mandla poked his head in from outside. "Ah, Auntie Grace. You mean it?" Grace nodded, overwhelmed. Yes. Later that evening, she entered Victoria's room with a cup of lemon tea. "Did they call?" Victoria asked, not looking up from her window. Grace's voice trembled. "Yes, Ma. They're doing it. Everything. Lily's surgery is going to happen." Victoria smiled slightly. Grace's eyes welled. I have to thank you." Victoria turned slowly. "I told you not to." "But you didn't have to help me." Victoria stood, her eyes gentler than ever before. "Helping you helped me." Grace tilted her head. "I don't understand." "I used to think strength was about control," Victoria said. "Perfect floors, silent staff, cold words. But I watched you. How you served through pain, how you never complained, how you held on to dignity without ever raising your voice. That's what strength really is." Grace smiled. Two women, two worlds, now joined by something far deeper than class. Grace hadn't just survived the mansion. She had transformed it. And in doing so, she transformed Victoria, too. It was Monday morning, just before sunrise. The air over Cape Town carried the gentle scent of dew and faint ocean breeze. Inside the Sinclair mansion, Grace moved like a whisper, mopping the marble hallway with the same precision and humility she had always shown. But something was different. Not in her hands, but in how people saw her. The housekeeper, once skeptical, now deferred to her before assigning new maids to their duties. Mandla, the gateman, greeted her each morning with, "Auntie Grace, good morning, Ma. May today smile on you." Mama Bussy saved the best portions of fish stew for her plate without a word. She was still a maid, but she had become the heartbeat of the house. That afternoon, Mr. Richard Sinclair returned early from a meeting. He walked into the living room, loosened his tie, and paused as he saw Grace quietly wiping the edges of the glass coffee table. He folded his newspaper and said, "Grace." She looked up surprised. "Yes, sir?" "Thank you," he said simply. Her brow lifted. "Sir?" "For staying," he clarified. "You've done something no one else could." Grace bowed slightly. "Thank you, sir." That evening, she knocked lightly on Victoria's door and brought in her usual cup of perfectly tempered lemon water. But Victoria didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, she turned from her dressing mirror and looked Grace in the eye. "They called me again," she said. Grace's heart skipped. "The doctors?" Victoria nodded. "They're scheduling the procedure for 2 weeks from today. They said you'll need to stay in Durban for at least a week. I've already arranged the transport." Grace's eyes welled up. "Ma, No," Victoria said softly but firmly. "No, thanks. Just go. Be with your daughter." There was a pause. Then Grace spoke, her voice gentle. "You're changing." Victoria gave a soft laugh. "No, you're just seeing who I was before the fear, before I thought perfection was my only weapon." Grace smiled. "You were never the enemy, Ma. Just another person trying not to break." That night, for the first time since her husband's first wife died, Victoria Sinclair knelt beside her bed and prayed. No script, no pride, just gratitude. When the day of the trip arrived, the entire staff gathered in the front yard to see Grace off. She wore a fresh wrapper and a white blouse. Her small suitcase was packed neatly. Victoria handed her a sealed envelope. "For anything Lily may need, and if you require more, call me." "Thank you," Grace whispered. Victoria pulled her into a light embrace. It wasn't stiff, it wasn't awkward. It was real. As the Sinclair SUV drove out of Bishop Langley Drive and onto the main road toward Durban, Mandela raised both arms like a conductor and shouted, "Safe journey, Madam Grace!" Everyone laughed. Even Victoria smiled. But when Grace arrived at the Durban Heart Children's Clinic, her heart was not laughing. It was racing. Lily's surgery was scheduled for the next day. Grace stayed by her side all night, singing softly, praying under her breath, whispering dreams into her daughter's ear. The surgery lasted 4 hours. It felt like 4 years. But when the surgeon walked out, his expression calm, Grace nearly collapsed from relief. "She's stable," he said. "The procedure went well. Her heart is strong." Grace dropped to her knees and wept, right there in the hallway. For the first time, the weight on her chest lifted. The child she thought she might bury would live. She stayed in Durban for a full week. During that time, Victoria called twice, not to check on her performance, but to ask, "How is Lily? How are you?" When Grace returned to the mansion, the scene awaiting her took her breath away. The entire household was gathered at the front yard, flowers trimmed, the pavement freshly washed. Mama Bussy wore a bright Isiksosa wrap. Mandela held a small sign that read, "Welcome home, Auntie Grace." And then Victoria stepped forward, not in a silk robe, not in high heels, but in a simple sky blue gown with no makeup, just a warm smile. "Welcome back," she said. "Thank you, Ma. I have something for you." Victoria led her to a small wooden table beneath the mango tree. On it sat a framed document. Grace opened it with trembling fingers. "Promotion. Letter head of household operations." Her mouth parted in shock. "Ma, what is this?" You've earned it. You'll oversee the entire staff now. Salary increase. Private room. You're no longer just a maid here, Grace. You're the soul of this house." Tears rolled down Grace's cheeks. But this time, they weren't from pain. They were from healing. Weeks passed. The mansion on Bishop Langley Drive was no longer a place of tension and silence. It now carried the rhythm of life, laughter in the kitchen, music drifting from the garden, soft conversation floating through hallways once choked with fear. And at the center of it all was Grace Thompson. No longer just the quiet woman with a mop. Now the head of household operations, with her own office by the laundry wing and a new uniform tailored in deep green, symbol of life, of growth. She walked with the same humility, still bowed her head in thanks, still rose before dawn. But the way people looked at her had changed. She was now someone whose opinion mattered, whose story had become a kind of legend among the staff. They no longer whispered, "Will she last?" They now said, "She saved this house." At night, when the lights were low and the house was quiet, Victoria Sinclair often found herself sitting outside on the balcony, with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, watching the stars. One night she turned to Grace, who had come up to deliver her evening tea, and said, "Do you ever think about what life could have been if pain never touched you?" Grace smiled softly. "Sometimes. But pain shaped who I became. I'd rather be whole than untouched." Victoria nodded slowly. "You're right." She paused. "I think I've spent too long performing strength, but you lived it." Grace didn't respond. She didn't need to. Victoria took a sip of her tea. "I want to do more, Grace. Not just for Lily, for others like her, like you." Grace looked at her, unsure. "I've been speaking with Dr. Adesua," Victoria continued. "I want to start a foundation. Not just a donation, something ongoing, a way to support mothers like you, working women, struggling women, who just need one hand to lift them." Grace blinked. "Ma," Victoria smiled. "We'll call it the Lily Grace Foundation. You'll help me run it. Think of it as your next promotion." Tears threatened to fall, but Grace held them. She had learned that strength wasn't loud. It was quiet, present, unshakable. That weekend, they launched the foundation quietly at the Vineyard Hotel. Just a few trusted guests, the doctors, and a few children from the clinic. Grace stood in front of the crowd, not in a maid's uniform, but in a navy blue dress, hair wrapped in soft gold. She gave her first speech. "I used to think survival was the goal, that if I could just breathe through the next day, maybe my daughter would live. But survival isn't the end. It's the seed of something more, something beautiful. I'm standing here because one person saw past my silence and chose to listen instead of command." The crowd stood in ovation. Victoria wiped tears, seated in the front row. Back at the mansion, everything continued, but now with joy. The walls remembered who they had once been and who they had become. Lily recovered quickly. She came to stay with Grace during school holidays, chasing mandla around the garden, singing songs with Mama Busi in the kitchen, and teaching Victoria how to laugh without makeup on. Grace still worked, still swept the halls, still whispered prayers at sunrise. But now she carried more than mops and towels. She carried a legacy. The maid who came in silence had become the voice of transformation. The mansion had not changed her. She had changed the mansion, one quiet day at a time. On a warm spring afternoon, Grace stood under the mango tree and watched Lily, now stronger, taller, run barefoot through the garden with two other girls from the hospital. The wind carried their giggles through the yard. Victoria stepped out beside her, holding 2 glasses of juice. "One day they'll grow up and forget how close they came to being lost," she said. Grace nodded. "That's what hope does. It buries the worst parts and waters the good." They stood in silence, watching the children. And for the first time since the Sinclair mansion was built, it felt like home.